When you're starting out, there's a lot to think about, and there's not a lot of time to think about it. But you can get a great mix by just focusing on 3 things. That is volume, EQ, and effects. I've got years of mixing experience, so with that experience, I'll walk you through the 3 steps that I always take even when I'm short on time, especially when I'm short on time. These steps build on each other, so even by starting with the basics, you get the most bang for your buck thinking about time. If you want to get a head start, you can grab my free EQ guide, 3 steps to perfect EQ, and I'll leave that in a link in the description down below. Let's dive in. So the first thing, the obvious thing is volume, right? Volume is like all of a mix. There is so much leeway for you if you just get the volume right. If you get the volume wrong, it does not matter if you think your mix sounds good, if it sounds fancy, doesn't matter if someone comes up to you and says, I can't hear the vocal. So volume is your number 1 priority. And when I say volume, I mean all aspects of volume. That is the signal level coming into the mixer. So that also means gain. That's the volume of the microphone when it is coming into the mixer and you turn the gain dial up. You need to get that right, because if you get your gain wrong, it can peak during the show, cause distortion, and that sounds terrible. If you gain it too low, you don't have enough signal to give further to your master faders, to your speakers, or to your monitor wedges on stage. And that makes it really, really difficult for you to balance all the elements correctly when you're mixing. And speaking of mixing, that's what you want to be focusing on when you start. You want to get all those faders in the right place. You want to make sure that everything is well balanced. You don't want to think, is that vocal too quiet? Make sure that that vocal is sitting on top. If you can't get that vocal on top, it's time to think about bringing the other elements down. Before you start thinking about reverb, about EQ, about compression, about all of these other parts of a mix, you need to think, can I get that vocal high enough? You've got to think as well, are the other elements of the mix loud enough? Are the guitars loud enough? Probably. Is the bass loud enough? Are there percussive elements or keys? Can you hear them when they're played? And conversely, you can ask yourself, are they too loud? If you can't hear your vocal, like I said, that might be because the guitars are screaming off the stage. So you need to keep an eye on the volume of the amplifiers. You need to keep an eye on the volume of your mixer as well. You can bring that down. If you have loud guitars on stage, why not just take the fader all the way down for a moment and see what it sounds like? Does the mix actually change? You will notice if it makes a difference. And of course, I also mean the master volume, your master fader on your mixer. Where is that sitting? Don't be afraid to drag that guy down or up depending on what you need. If you've balanced the mix well, but the audience all comes in, the show starts, and you're not happy with the overall level, you can just push it up a little bit. Obviously, you need to be aware of feedback and things like that, but that is a control for you to use. Similarly, are you deafening your audience? Are you deafening yourself? You really got to look out for your hearing, and you've got to look out for the hearing of the people at the show. That is your job. So don't be afraid to drag that master down 5 decibels if everything is too loud. You could honestly forget every single other element in a mix apart from volume and still mix a great show that people would leave saying, that was fantastic, I loved it. Get your volume right. Step 2 is EQ, and now this builds on step 1. So of course, get that free EQ guide in the description. EQ is really just an extension of volume, right? It just allows you to fine tune the volume of a certain sound source. So if you have your guitar, you might say, oh, the bass is too loud. And you can then grab an EQ and turn the bass down in that guitar. You're just readjusting the volume balance of a single sound source. Now, if I only had 2 tools to mix a show, it would definitely be volume and EQ. EQ is insanely powerful. When the vocals are high enough, but you have questions like, are they nice and clear? Then you can use EQ to address that. You can cut maybe the low mids of your vocal to add clarity to your vocal. Or maybe your guitars are sounding too harsh. You can grab a little bit of EQ and cut maybe 2 kilohertz. This goes for vocals as well. Using a high-pass filter, for example, on just about every instrument, apart from those bass-dedicated instruments, can actually really clear up the low end of a mix and give the bass drum and the bass guitar a place to shine. So try grabbing a high-pass filter and rolling it up to 100 Hz on just about every single sound source. Maybe a bit lower on toms if you're mixing drums. And I would say start by only taking away, just to limit your options and allow you to make a decision. I'm not saying you can't boost ever, but I'm saying that by only choosing to cut in the beginning, you'll be more decisive about where you cut and why you cut. Always have a reason for what you're doing when you're EQing. And if you're cutting more than 6 decibels, you better have a really good reason for doing that, because that is quite an intense EQ cut. Again, I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm just saying that you really need to justify that, and it's not super common. So this is how I recommend you EQ. split up your hearing, right? Listen first to the bass region of the sound source that you're listening to, whether that's the bass guitar, the vocals, or anything. Listen just to the bass. Think just about the bass and ask yourself, is there too much bass? Is there too little? If there's too much bass, cut some away. If there's too little, add a little bit in. Then move your thinking along and think about the mids of that sound source. It's a vocal maybe. And think, is there something in the mids that I don't like? Is it honky? Is it rumbly? And then cut that away if you don't like it. And similarly, think about the high frequencies as well. Is there something harsh, nasty? Is it too sharp up there? Try cutting that. Like I said, you can also add, but just be aware that when you add, you're also adding volume and you can contribute to feedback. But it is a tool there for you to use, so use it. The third step then is effects, and effects are just the icing on the cake of a mix, right? And I would recommend that you just start with reverb. Just ask yourself, do I want to put reverb on this or not? And then start asking yourself the volume question. How much reverb do I want to put on this? Reverb can really give you a lot of space and depth in a mix. And I tend to add it to a lot of sources in a mix. So vocals, snare drums, toms, other percussion, acoustic pianos, horns, violins, these all benefit from a nice reverb. But in the beginning, if you limit yourself to one reverb that you just turn up and down for each sound source and focus on that level, you're going to get a great mix really, really quickly, and you're going to be able to focus without wasting your time thinking about all of these different parameters. So don't think about delay, don't think about hall versus plate, don't think about long versus short, just think about, does it need it? How much does it need? And then once you've got a grip on all of these three foundations, you can move on to adjusting it. You can add in the other elements of a mix. Now there is loads more to learn about mixing. I'll leave a video up here about compression and up here about gating. I'll also leave a video down here about mixing drums. And if this was useful, please subscribe to the channel and leave me a comment down below. Let me know where you are in your journey. Other than that, go and apply this formula at your next show and let me know how it goes. Goodbye.